Welcome to Adapted, the podcast where we explore adaptations of various forms. I'm today's host, Tom, and with me is
Pat.
And KJ.
Today we'll be discussing Sunny Spaces by exploring The Long Goodbye, the 1953 novel by Raymond Chandler, as well as the 1973 film directed by Robert Altman. All right, so The Long Goodbye from 1953 was supposed to have been the final Philip Marlowe novel, although Chandler would write an ill-advised sequel. This is Chandler's most personal novel, the one he was most proud of as well, and the one he wrote while his wife was dying, and featured as a major supporting character the alcoholic novelist Roger Wade and the alcoholic British-Canadian war hero Terry Lennox, both of whom appeared to be based on Chandler, and Chandler sort of uses his famous detective to comment on them, comment on himself. It's pretty depressing. I'm not going to lie. It is the roughest of his books that I've read to get through. The film, though, directed by Robert Altman, was released in 1973. It updates the classic detective to 1970s Los Angeles. It also moves from a very bitter space to a very kind of comic, satirical space. It is a very, very loose adaptation. The plot is dramatically different. It features the unlikely Elliot Gould as Marlowe, which prompted apparently in its time a Not My Marlowe fan reaction to the casting. Lee Brackett had written the script in the mid-1960s and made major plot changes, believing the private eye conventions to have become cliched by that point. Later, Robert Altman was suggested to direct after Peter Bogdanovich passed on the opportunity and suggested Altman would be good for it. Apparently, the producers brought in Elliot Gould to play Marlowe in order to convince Altman to do it. They had worked together on MASH. Gould had not worked for 2 years due to bad behavior, and this was kind of his coming back to the screen. Altman, he called this movie, quote, a satire in melancholy. And most of the actors in this picture were not professionals, including a former professional baseball pitcher, the ex-lover of the scandalous writer Clifford Irving, a film director, a comedy variety TV performer, and a California governor. All right, so getting into this picture. Should we start off with what we think of the book, us who've read it, maybe give a brief plot summary? I know, KJ, you haven't read the book, and I think trying to elucidate the plot a little bit, because it is dramatically different from the plot of the movie. Even the killer is different, so it's a whole
Yeah, I mean,
different
it's
thing going
totally
on.
different. Yeah, I was not expecting that ending, which I
Yeah.
guess maybe was the point. Um, it's weird because I mean the book, I understand some of why they, if when you go and see The Big Sleep is almost lifted verbatim directly into the movie. And you can kind of do it. It's a convoluted plot, but it's not that convoluted. The Long Goodbye is insanely complicated. Like the number of characters that come in and out and how everything mixes together. I mean, you have the whole Terry Lennox plot. It seems like that one's just gone. And there's a ton of other stuff that just kind of happens in between where Marlowe takes on a couple other random cases and talks to a bunch of other people. And there's no sense at any point there. For a while, I remember when I first read it, he gets the case to go take a look at the writer, and I sort of assumed that was just like another filler case that was going to happen for a little while. And then it just kept going. And I'm like, oh, this is actually, I guess this is like, oh, now we're moving on. We're not just having him doing random filler answering mail in his office. This is actually a continuation of the plot, but it's a new plot. And it's very, and then eventually you obviously start getting the sense of like, okay, these are interconnected. But it's a really complicated plot. It's much more so. So I can understand why they did that. Like, they have no, he meets Terry Lennox. Terry Lennox is already his friend. There's no other introduction. There's no whole thing with like he meets Terry actually in a parking lot when Terry's with his wife and Terry's drunk and can't get home, and then Marlowe drives into his house and then they hang out for a while, and then eventually Terry gets back with his ex-wife and he has this whole thing, and then he goes to Vegas, and there's like the first 50 pages are just about Terry Lennox and how he becomes friends with Marlowe. They cut all that, which I get. totally makes sense in an adaptation. Just be like, we don't need to know that we can just be told right in the very beginning that Lennox and Marlowe were friends. We'll accept that. We move on. There's a whole other side plot there with like Terry Lennox is a war hero. He's actually scarred in the book, and the other figures like the Vegas figure, and there's another guy who were saved supposedly by him in the war because Lennox had jumped on a grenade, and that's why they're all beholden to him. So there's like another whole series of plots. There's a lot of subplots. And I don't know why Chandler did that, whether that was just his, I have a lot of ideas for a story and I'm gonna put them all in here, or whether he was trying to sort of misdirect your attention so you didn't quite know where to focus. Like you don't know where exactly to put your focus for a lot of the story, it feels like. Um, which just makes for a very different reading experience. To your point, it's also, I didn't remember this. I read it maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I read like all of them in succession. So maybe that's why I didn't notice it as much because I was probably getting to the end of getting a little tired of reading them. But I think it is a depressing book. Like it is it's wildly depressing. It's really bitter. It's sort of, it feels like it's sort of Marlowe, in the Big Sleep and the other, even, Farewell My Love and these other ones, like, yeah, he's sort of cynical, but he's not bitter. In The Long Goodbye, he is a bitter, bitter man, and he hates these people. Like he just doesn't like them. And he's happy to be kind of mean to them at times and just kind of putting them down all the time, and he's just sort of, I get it, there's supposed to be these like alcoholic ne'er-do-wells, but he's just, it's a really kind of harsh reading experience.
Yeah, I agree with that. The plot seems to have these kind of two parts to it. A prelude which feels like a shortened first half, which is the Terry Lennox half, and then there's the Roger Wade half, which is the writer who's an alcoholic who needs to finish some kind of nonsense historical romance that sells a lot, but no one thinks it's any good, especially Roger Wade. And Wade and Lennox seem to be something like versions of each other. Like you get a complete character if you mix the two of them together. And initially, I knew this was Chandler's most personal novel, and that I knew, knowing something of Chandler's biography, he was a deeply alcoholic man. I think we mentioned this in the Double Indemnity episode where they had to have a doctor come and keep him awake in order to finish working on scripts for the studios when he was making movies. So he has a lot in common with these characters. Initially, I thought Terry Lennox was based on him and that he's commenting on Terry Lennox. And then when Roger Wade comes in, you go, oh, this is the guy who's based upon Chandler. And I think a lot of the bitterness of it comes from the fact that Chandler is having Marlowe, his hero, his most famous character, his sort of reason for success and reason for fame, commenting on him. And it's a very bitter, angry, depressed man, Chandler at this point, who's watching his wife die, who's having his character kind of flagellate him for him. And what's interesting about it, I think, too, is that in his other books, especially The Big Sleep ends with the knight saving the day. Now, what he saves the day, what he does is he stops a woman who is completely depraved, just in terms of lust and in terms of violence. She's a sinner, right? She has the most lust, she has the most violence, and her actions don't make any sense. She just reacts like a giant, angry, horny child. And that's that's what happens at the end of The Big Sleep. In this, we do have characters who behave badly, but especially with Terry Lennox, they're not, their sin is not lust or violence. It's indolence. They're just slothful. They're lazy. And he has this comment. I have the book here towards the end where he meets Terry again. So the book ends with Terry coming back and visiting him, and he meets him again, and he talks to him, and he says, "You were a nice guy," Marlowe says to Lennox, "because you had a nice nature, but you were just as happy with mugs or hoodlums as with honest men, provided the hoodlums spoke fairly good English and had fairly acceptable table manners. You were a moral defeatist, I think maybe the war did it. And again, I think maybe you were born that way. And I think that's why this book is so bitter and so much more depressing, even though the character we kind of like. I mean, Terry Lennox is kind of likable. He survives in the end. It turns out he's alive. Um, and it's that he's a moral defeatist, that it ends with kind of moral defeat and sloth. And that's what the knight, our hero, our Galahad, is up against. With violence and with those types of crimes, Marlowe seems pretty adept, right? He gets it. There are people who are violent. You need to stop them to make society go on. But these moral defeatists, these kind of weak men, that's what we're left with. And Terry Lennox lives. He goes on. He, has become a Mexican at this point or whatever. But that the evil is still in the world because the evil, it's sort of distilled. It's not the evil of incredible violence, it's the evil of weakness. And that survives. And I think that's one of the reasons why this book is so bitter. And it's also Chandler blaming himself for this, right? This is the sin I have. I am the indolent man. And so the book is just harsh. It's very harsh. And it's made all the more, it's more clear how harsh it is because he's still using a lot of the sort of detective fiction private eye cliches that are out of style by now. I mean, they're in Chandler's work, but you sort of like them. They're fun. They're kind of part of the poetry. Here, they just sort of stick out like a sore thumb because the book is so much more angry at the world. And it's also interesting. It's, I think, the first book of his that takes place actually in Los Angeles and not in Bay City, right? It's even in a real. He moves into a real space as opposed to the fictional city of Bay City. I haven't read The Little Sister, but I think all of his other books are at least taking place mostly in fictional spaces. This isn't. This is in
They
a
could
real
all be
world.
real spaces or fictional spaces. As long as they said Los Angeles, I would assume it was real.
Yeah, but I mean, this is
I guess I
all
mean that's more just my lack of knowledge of
of
Los
Los
Angeles
Angeles. Yeah,
geography.
yeah. Me as well. I don't know if that reservoir has a fence or whatever, or if that reservoir exists. They mention at one point, but um, it just that stuck out to me too. Like the other books are, they're exclusively in fake or mostly in cities that he's making up, and this is a real place. So yeah, it's a much rougher read than like Farewell, My Lovely, which is sort of a delight to read. That book is a lot of fun, and I think that is my favorite of his. Even though I haven't read The Little Sister, so maybe that's the best book. But um, yeah, so it was an odd reading experience, and it also seems like a natural close for this character type. Like this seems to be the point where the world is just maybe too bitter for even the Philip Marlowes of the world to kind of endure it. Um, yeah, so that was my experience reading it. Was man, this is rough to get through. What do you think about the film adaptation as we move on, move into Altman's work? Um, I have to say, the film adaptation, I saw it when I was a teenager or in my early 20s. I don't remember exactly when I saw it. And I really liked it. I went through an Altman phase where I watched all of Altman's movies in a row. This was before Prairie Home Companion because I still haven't seen that. So, whatever year it was, I think I was still in high school. But I liked this movie a lot. I thought it was really funny to have the opposite basically of oh, well, what's his name? Of Humphrey Bogart playing Philip Marlowe. That made me laugh. And watching it now, the movie was, I found it really funny and really enjoyable. It's a satire, but it's also not, it, it's a kind of a satire, kind of a parody. It's not bitter at all, I don't think. Even though the ending is kind of shocking. I mean, it seems to really also be not so much about the plot, but about the scene. The city of Los Angeles is, as we said this before, people talk about this all the time. They talk about, New York or New
It's always
Orleans.
it's New
It's a
Orleans. It's always New
character.
Orleans. Yeah, the
It's
city
always
is
a
a character.
character.
The
Yeah.
city is a character.
Which is kind of silly, but in this, I think, as we saw with Nashville and Altman's Nashville, it's like there's a scene, right? The scene is the star. And I think that's true here. There's more plot than there is in Nashville. I mean, there's basically no plot in Nashville. We're just there to watch cool characters interact. But that's kind of going on here too. We get a kind of sense of the scene. There isn't an economy like in earlier work. There's the nude women who live across the way and do yoga and apparently are perfectly fine selling candles at a store somewhere when they're not high off their ass. And that seems to be the kind of world we're in. And I think Altman's laughing at it in some way, but he's also loving the hell out of it. I think he likes this place. And, Altman's house, his personal home where he was living at the time, was where Roger Wade lived. So he just filmed in his own house in order to get that. So it seems to be a sort of lived in kind of fun film. So I really liked it a lot. I enjoyed it a lot more than the book, even though I think the book is doing something more complicated, but I was wondering what you guys thought of the movie.
So I hadn't read the book, and I watched the movie. And guys, I'm saying this every week. I am so tired of these detective movies. Oh my gosh, audience, I hope you're enjoying them. I hope you're keeping up. I had no idea what was going on. 57 minutes in, and all of a sudden we're back in Ross's dad's apartment, and these dudes are like threatening him. And all of a sudden I realized, I don't know who these guys are. I don't know why they're threatening him. He gave a ride to somebody, and people are upset. But what's the deal? Like I had no idea what was going on for most of the movie. They go to Mexico. Well, they go to Mexico twice, but they go to Mexico the first time. I was like, all right, time to go to Mexico. Then the scene changes, and I guess we're back at the house, but we're at the beach in front of the house. And I'm like, is this still Mexico, or are we back in, I didn't realize it was LA. Are we back in LA? It was very confusing, not knowing the plot. I think the movie would be better if you had seen it before, but then there's no mystery, so I don't know. I don't know the best way to watch this movie.
I mean, the mystery aspect of it is pretty weak. Like it's just,
Yeah.
I mean, it literally ends with him going down and just shooting Terry Lennox and being like, "I know you did it." And I remember going, I mean, I've read the book and I know the book ends differently because Terry Lennox didn't do it, but he's like, "I know you did it," and I literally watched him like, "How do you know he did it?" Like, you actually don't really have any evidence that he did it. I'm not quite certain how like. I don't think that's ever actually proven, right? There was never anything that. What did he actually find that convinced him that Terry Lennox did the murder?
He does nothing the whole movie.
Mhm.
But I guess that's my point. I don't think, but I think that is part of the point. I don't think he ever actually finds anything, right?
Yeah, I mean the only thing you get is that he bribes the
He
police
bribed the
people.
guys to fake his death, but
Yeah, but
he
you don't
did
know
that
that
in he sort
he
of
does
does
that in the
that in the
book.
original and didn't do the murder.
Yeah.
So the fact that he faked his death doesn't mean anything. He faked his death in the book and didn't do the murder. He faked
Mhm.
his death in this one, and that seems to be the only evidence of why he's the murderer, other than the fact that everyone else is already dead, or so there's no other characters for it to be. So I guess in the logic of a movie, it would have to be him because we've run out of suspects.
Yeah, and also the in the book, Roger, the author, who keeps
Thinks
getting
he murdered him.
yeah, he thinks he murdered him, and also Roger gets killed by his wife. Clearly, he gets killed by his wife. They set it up to look like a suicide, but you find out that his wife did it. In this, there's no way his wife set that up. He just drunkenly ran into the ocean. And, for all her conniving, she seemed pretty upset that he ran into the ocean. She makes a real college try to save his life, right? She's the one who notices it and summons, not summons, but Marlowe's right there, but it's like, we have to go save this guy.
Well, that was
Um,
why I thought he was, because they show her looking out the window and watching, and I thought, oh, that's kind of a cool way for her to, essentially, because she's just like, I'm just going to watch this happen. I don't even have to do anything. I thought, oh, that's a, femme fatale way to kill someone. And I'm like, no, she warned him. It was, nope,
mhm.
that didn't go the way I thought it would.
Yeah, so I agree. I think the mystery doesn't really work. And I don't think Altman
But I don't think
cares
it's
a
meant to. I don't think
damn.
Altman
Yeah.
cares. That's the thing
He,
is I don't think Altman cares. To your point, KJ, I don't think he cares that someone's confused. I don't know. Maybe you're supposed to be confused.
He
Because
went
here's the
all the
thing.
way down to Mexico twice
But he went down there because he knows that that's where because the whole thing is he drove Terry Lennox to the air. He
to the
drove
border.
him to
mhm,
Mexico. He
mhm.
drove him past the border. He drives him to Tijuana.
Okay, right, yeah.
He
Well,
drives
right.
into Tijuana so that he can take a flight through Mexico. And he knows that Terry Lennox killed himself in this small town in Mexico. So there is a reason why he goes there. Um,
Maybe the first time.
well, he goes the first time because he goes and then he realizes he's like, you know what? He totally faked his death. I need to go down there and figure and basically bribe them to tell me what actually happened.
So he's just curious and wants a
Yeah, he
okay.
just
Wants
wants to
a
know what actually
resolution.
happened. So he went down there to basically confirm, like, and then he sees the photos and he sees everything and he's like, this seems pretty above board. I guess he did kill himself. And then I think something, again, it's not actually explained 100% why, I
Hmm.
don't think. Something convinces him that no, Terry is still alive.
Well, he
And
gets the
so he,
$5,000.
but he got he gets that in
In
the
the
book too.
book,
It's
that
just
can,
he
yeah,
gets it in the book, but he just gets it right before Terry dies.
yeah. In the book, though, it's he kind of figures it out because he realizes there's something wrong with how that letter would have been mailed, and that's why he doesn't go down to Tijuana. He sort of just contacts the right people, and it's like,
And
how,
Terry shows up.
and Terry just shows up at his
Back in
office
LA?
back
Yeah.
in L.A. or wherever he lives. Yeah, yeah.
In the
So
movie, he gets the 5K after he gets back from Mexico.
yeah,
Yeah, so
in
he oh, I guess that's true, he does, doesn't he?
yeah, in the book, he never goes to Mexico. It just
But they do make a point about the fact that he doesn't get to pick up his mail because the lady was standing there checking her mail, remember? And he was like, "I'll let you finish your mail
So
first."
yeah,
maybe
So
he
they do
did
actually
get
make
it
a
first.
specific point of showing it that he doesn't get his mail that
Okay.
day.
So it could have been delayed. It wasn't a.
But I think
Is that how
that's
he got it? He got it in the mail?
yeah, he got the
mhm,
mail.
Okay.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I mean, I think, I mean, and again, I don't know if this was sort of the point that you're right. There is no explanation. Again, that's not in the book. The whole thing with like the gangster coming and being like, "I want my 250 grand." I'm like,
That's
that's not
new.
there.
Yeah.
That's new.
In the in
But
the book,
the
it's the gangster is a friend of Terry who's kind of helping cover it up.
yeah,
He was in Mexico and he kind of helped Terry fake his own death. So that's why he goes to Marlon's like, "Hey, don't you look into this or I'll blah 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 you." You know, that he's doing it presumably for a noble reason, not being horrible.
but I mean, I don't know if the point of it was supposed to be like, yeah, the audience doesn't totally know what's going on because Marlowe doesn't totally know what's going
Mm.
on. So I don't know if that's part of the point is supposed to be that you're just confused because he's confused. Maybe.
Yeah.
Game.
I think it's just he did like Allman, I mean he's said like I Chandler fans will hate me for this, and I don't give a damn. I think his whole thing is he's interested in this sort of outdated man with this outdated job in this really cool, hip space. That's my kind of reading of it. Because Marlowe's still like, he always puts on a tie. Yes, this tie, and it's actually the same. It's the American flag tie that he wears in the book. You can't see them in the movie, but that's apparently the tie. And it's I remember when he goes to sit and drink with Roger, and Roger's like, "Why don't you have a drink and take off the tie?" And he's like, "No, like I'll have a drink with you, but I won't take off the tie." Or he like when he goes to save him, he
I'd love
into the
that.
ocean.
Like,
He's like,
yeah.
"Just watch my tie," you know. And he drives like an old '40s Oldsmobile through the movie. He's driving this like old broken down car. So he just seems to be this kind of guy from another generation that just doesn't fit in there, even though he's of the age where he should fit in. He's young enough to be, the generation of all these people, but he's just this sort of out of date guy who is in a place that's sort of sunny and kind of nice and it's a place where you can live well on seemingly not that much money. Everybody's having a party with a bunch of girls in bikinis. I don't know where these women are coming from, but they always seem to show up in these fun parties, and you can kind of rub elbows with accomplished people pretty easily. And I think that's what's going on. It's an appreciation of this scene and a bit of a satire of it as well, or a parody of it as well. And so I think the mystery is just utterly secondary. I think the mystery is just a way of propelling this man into these various spaces that presumably he should be adept at handling, and he's not really that that adept at handling. He loses his cat, he gets beat up. He is the ultimate loser, right? As Terry Lennox says in the end. The only thing he walks away with, he doesn't even have the $5,000.
No, he doesn't have the 5,000.
Yeah, in the
Give it
book,
away.
he keeps the $5,000. He keeps his portrait of Madison in his safe, and this even loses that merely to find out where
Fine by
Terry
me.
is.
It's okay. It's okay by me. It's
Yeah,
okay by me.
yeah,
I do like
yeah,
this repeated of that. It's okay
yeah,
by me. It's okay by me.
yeah. A lot of this movie was improvised. The script was given a lot of credit, which is hilarious since so much of this movie was improvised. My favorite though is Mash. The screenwriter, I think I can't remember his name, but he won an Oscar for Mash, and apparently was furious at Altman for all the improvisations. But then he won an Oscar for it, so he kind of shut his mouth quite quickly after that. Um, but
I
that's
mean, I was gonna say, I mean, I think you're right in the sense that I get it I mean, you're right. The mystery didn't really interest me. I didn't even totally get, like, even when they had the thing where he's getting beat up and they're like, we're gonna, the whole scene. Although I will say the violence in this movie does feel much more real than the violence in other movies.
the
Like,
violence seems out of place, I would say.
yeah, the violence is it's striking, which is interesting because
Mhm.
usually in these sort of film noirs, sort of the violence kind of happens and then it kind of goes away. Like no one ever really unless you die, you don't really have any after effects of violence. Whereas in this movie, like there's a lot, like and it, especially that the woman who gets smashed across the face with the bottle, like because
Yeah.
there's a lot of stuff that's sort of shocking,
Mhm.
and it does kind of stick out at you, but. For the most part, I remember that scene where he's sitting there and they're doing the like we're gonna take our clothes off to show that we have nothing to hide. I'm like, it's a very odd scene. And then they're like, "Oh, now you can go." I'm like, "Why? I don't get it." Because again, it's not in the book. So I was like,
Mhm.
"I don't know what's actually going on here." I'm like, "Oh, I guess she gave the money, but then he got hit by a car." And it was just sort of, but part of me, I'm like, I just go, I don't think I'm supposed to care. Like I was just like, I don't think I'm really supposed to follow this story. So I just kind of was like, I guess I'll just accept it. And same thing when, again, when they got to the end and then he just goes and shoots Terry Lennox and is like, "You're the one who did it." I'm like, how do you know that? Like, there was never anything to prove it. So I just think the story is just, it does kind of have, I guess, in some ways, it's as if Nashville had a plot, but the plot really was, you're not supposed to really watch it. And so, but he, I guess because he was doing an adaptation, he felt like, well, I have to have a plot. The book has a plot. In that sense, it felt a little bit like the one we did last season, the adaptation movie, in the sense that it's sort of they took the plot and then sort of were like, yeah, we're going to use this to have other fun things and sort of have fun with it. But what I'm wondering, this is sort of what I was wondering as I watched it was like, well, is this just because, to your point, Tom, I think, is like this is a genre, this is a form that it's too well known and it's too distinct. So at this point, they're like, all we can really do is you can either parody it in something like this, or you can use it as sort of like more modern films will use it, but they have to kind of radically change the style or something like a Mulholland Drive, something like that. You can kind of do it with like an LA Confidential. You can still get away with doing a modern one, but a lot of them are you have to change the style. You have to do something different. You can't just keep doing the same boilerplate ones that were done so much in the 40s and the 50s anymore. Like I actually really like watching them. I don't mind watching them. So, KJ would not like my DVD collection, but and I have a DVD collection still. But it's sort of like those are, I like watching them, but I get it. They do get repetitive. There is a certain thing where you're just kind of you get keyed in on what the things are going to happen and you shouldn't know it. This one doesn't really care. It's not going to key you in on certain things because half of it they're just throwing them out there and they kind of don't make sense. And it's
All right, so
more
I'm
having.
gonna interrupt the long goodbye discussion to bring up what I teased during last week.
Yeah, I was trying to open that up
This is
for you.
it.
I was
This is it.
trying to give you
Get
a
hype.
seamless chance.
All right, audience. Teased last week. I watched a movie or two since our last recording, and I want to argue it's a modern noir. And Pat's saying there's tried and true. It's been done over and over again. You got to change the style, maybe add some synth, but keep the fast talker. I think Beverly Hills Cop is a modern noir. Have you guys seen Beverly Hills Cop? Am I standing alone here?
No, you might be standing alone.
I
Pat,
don't
no?
remember what happens in it. I do. I think I've seen it, but I mean, let me put it this way: I'm pretty sure I've seen it, but I think it's the same thing where it's using, from what I remember, it's using a lot of the same tropes. Doesn't he go down to like a warehouse? Isn't there like a warehouse scene? I remember, and
Oh,
am I
yeah.
right?
There's a
Yeah. So
warehouse scene.
okay.
Yep.
So yeah. So I think it's like it's taking a lot of the tropes of noir crime fiction. I do think it's true. I think you're correct that it's doing that, but it's doing it as a comedy. It's sort of, but it's using the same tropes in order to
Well, hang on, hang
create
on. I'm gonna wait. It's
the
so
the effect.
I think it's as much as a comedy as the one with the insurance, Double Indemnity. Right? When they're fast talking to each other, it's funny. When he says, "Oh, they keep the liquor locked. Don't worry, I always carry keys." Like it's the same level of humor. It's just Eddie Murphy instead of
It's a
so.
different energy level. It's the energy level is different, is what I would say. You're correct. It's the
Hmm.
dialogue is the same, but the energy level is different.
It's also the tone. I mean, the director. I haven't seen this movie, but if it's an Eddie Murphy, an '80s movie with Eddie Murphy as the main person, the attitude of the director is going to be very different. That's going to be felt through the thing, right? I mean, you're going to feel like the kind of comic
But you're
lightness.
not wrong. I
Yeah,
don't think
yeah,
it's
yeah, yeah.
wrong. I think you're correct in the sense that you're right, it's the similar dialogue, it's the same fast talking stuff. It's just that then this is why I think it works is you got to change it. You can't do the same thing. You're right. If you took Beverly Hills Cop and you stuck Humphrey Bogart in there, it probably would
I think it
work.
would work just fine. He's
You could
constantly
you
kind of scamming people into doing what he needs. He's getting
yeah,
beat up all the time. It's all.
but it would be a totally different tone because you'd have Humphrey Bogart doing it and he would be taking it deathly seriously. Like
Let's if you guys have a chance, let's watch it. And maybe next week we'll revisit Beverly Hills
okay.
Okay,
Cop
I'll watch it
as where. All right,
between.
great. It's on Netflix.
I mean, it's worth putting it this way though. The guy who plays the insurance salesman in Double Indemnity was a comic actor. He was not a dramatic actor. He did comedy mostly. He did much lighter fare. So I wouldn't disagree with it, except for the fact that I think it's just that the energy level and tone is higher. I do think you could take the exact script probably, plop Humphrey Bogart in there, and it wouldn't be the same movie, but it would feel more like you could almost transport it back and put it in black and white, transport it back to the 40s and 50s, and you probably get away with it. It's only because it's being done in color with a little with sort of,
With
it's
synth
just
and 80s flair and yeah,
yeah, and just more flair and just
balky.
more
Like
energy
it's
and just color and yeah, synth.
But it's a good point. I think you're making like the
You could
with the
take the
noir.
movie and transport it back to the
Yeah,
1940s and I think it would work. And you
I
could take
I
Humphrey
agree.
Bogart and plop him into this
I
movie and
agree.
it would be just a different style. But I think you're right.
but I think that's a big difference here is that like you couldn't drop Humphrey Bogart into this movie. It wouldn't work. Humphrey Bogart cannot play a character who has no idea he doesn't. Humphrey Bogart can't play a character that is incompetent in situations.
Yeah, he'd solve it.
He figure it. He
Even if
could,
the script didn't have him solving it, he'd solve
yeah,
it.
yeah. He might not know what's going on. Somebody might get the best of him, but he's still going to demonstrate pretty high levels of competence, and it's going to be surprising. Like when he gets knocked out when he first meets the Fat Man in the
Maltese
Dashiell
Falcon.
Hammond in Maltese Falcon, that was very surprising to me that he didn't have the control over that situation. When it happens to Elliot Gould for the sixth or seventh time, it's not surprising at all. You know, he is not a person who is prepared for this world. And I don't think it's an issue of like it's a comedy and it's really fun, even though this movie is pretty funny. I mean, it made me laugh a lot. I think it's just uh, a sort of kind of hipstery look at a really cool place from the perspective of somebody who's an outsider.
Well, I mean, that's sort of what the Big Lebowski. That's essentially
Yeah,
Big Lebowski, which is playing in the same thing, and so is like Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, same kind of concept. Like they're all playing in that same sandbox.
yeah, yeah. That's a good point. And LA is the place to do that, right? That's the most famous insider outsider city in the world, right? Probably even more so than New York. And you have a character who's just, usually the private eye is somebody who's a liminal character. He's in the good and he's in the bad. And here he's like in the know. He's got one foot in the know. He knows this famous writer, but mostly he's a loser. Mostly he doesn't know anybody. He has no kind of real cachet or real style. And it's sort of fun for, from a person who maybe feels a bit more like a loser or on the outside of kind of popular groups or whatnot. It's a real fun watch to be like that the kind of smirking and funny. He is still funny. Ellie Gold is very funny in this role, who's looking in at all these kind of hip people and these people who've got it together and is just sort of observing it. We're sort of sitting around with him observing these weird things that happen and these bizarre behaviors that happen. And it is, I don't know, I found it satisfying, even though he doesn't really know, as you point out, Pat, that Terry actually did it. I still find it satisfying that he got one, he got one thing off on someone. Um, yeah, it's really unsatisfying that he didn't get a little revenge on the gangster. In the book, he kind of does. He gets to punch him and sort of, keep his dignity in that way. Um, but that ending, I think, at least it gives us something. At least it gives us this loser. He has some sort of um, some sort of competency, some sort of grasp on the situation in the end of the movie. He's able to walk away dancing, and that's kind of nice.
Because he shot his friend when his friend didn't think he was going to shoot him?
Yeah, but his friend has it
His friend
coming.
committed a murder.
Yeah, he's yeah, friend killed people for money and a woman. Like it's a bad thing that he did. I mean, the movie is setting it up to be like Terry is a bad guy. He has it coming. I think Altman is telling you that at that scene. Like Terry's like lounging around. He's screwed over all these people. He's killed his wife in order to really in order to make money. I mean, that's what he says. He's like, now I'm with somebody who's worth a lot more money. And then he just starts telling this guy who we spent all our time with that what a loser he is, and look how I screwed you over in order to make this happen. Um, I,
Let's
I
talk
think
about the money
that's
for a second.
mm,
What do you do with a $5,000 bill in Mexico? Who in Mexico is taking that and saying, "Oh, okay, here's I don't know, all the Coca-Cola in Mexico." Like that's a lot of money to
mm,
What do you do with it?
I don't know. I mean, I think that in the book, I think kind of the point is like this is a Federal Reserve note that's exclusively used for transactions at the Federal Reserve. I don't think you do anything with it. I
Right?
think
Who's
you
taking
put,
that?
yeah, maybe,
You got change for 5,000?
yeah,
No.
maybe if, I don't know, if somebody gave me $5,000 to tell them some information, I think I would still take the $5,000 bill, but
That's
I'm not
true.
entirely sure how I would cash it. So yeah, I liked this movie when I was a kid. I like this movie, I think, more now. Um, I will say I also, while I don't think the violence works in it, because it's such a weird tonal shift.
But I think it's supposed to be. I don't know if it's supposed to be there. Like I feel like that's intentional. You wouldn't
Yeah,
have because you could cartoonize that. Like I don't think Altman was being I don't think that was him, not to say he's incompetent, but I don't think that was him making a mistake. I think that was him being intentional because it's still meant to give a certain reality grounded in the to sort of ground the reality of it. There's an argument, I think I've seen that's like this happens a lot in noir films, especially Dashiell Hammett, that violence only has meaning in like a Dashiell Hammett, Dashiell Hammett book, violence happens all the time and it doesn't really carry much meaning except when it happens to the main character in the Dashiell Hammett one, then it actually has meaning. So I'm guessing he's going with something else here. Whereas it's like it's true, a lot of the violence in these noir films doesn't have meaning, and I think he's intentionally drawing that out to sort of focus on it.
because there isn't that much violence in the movie. Even when the cops are pushing him around, they're far more violent to him in the book than they are here.
Yeah.
They just sort of shove him a few times. But it's the one violent thing in it, and it is pretty gruesome. And
Well,
it's
there's
also
even though, but there's like the one thing when he gets punched by, when the gangster, the Las Vegas gangster comes with all of his guys and they like punch him in the kidneys or punch him in the groin or whatever they do, like he's literally on the ground crawling. Like I think they're making it clear that like this is real. The violence here is meant to be real, that what you're seeing.
I think it breaks through because I think it breaks through the as we're calling it the sunny space. I think that's what Altman was intending. I personally just doesn't work for me, but I see what he's coming from. I don't think it's a mistake. I think it's there is violent consequences to what's happening. It isn't this kind of schmuck who's kind of falling all over the place and bumbles into the solution. There is a danger here. And so when Terry later threatens to basically castrate him, I think, in that scene where everybody's taking their clothes off, I think
It's not Terry. It's not Terry who does
not
it.
Terry, excuse me,
The
the
other dude.
gangster who
Yeah.
used to be Menendez, but is now has a different name in the movie. Um, I think you're supposed to be this is a possibility. Like they might actually do this to him. And having the woman who he scarred still sitting there with the bandages on her face is a real kind of gruesome detail. Um, but outside of that, like I found this movie, I found it so funny. And I really liked watching Elliot Gould kind of stumble through this world with his outdated clothes and car and all that. Um, I love Sterling Hayden as Roger in this The man who, it's a crime against cinema that nobody wrote the Hemingway biopic for him to star in. That man would have been amazing as Ernest Hemingway. I really liked his performance in this. I think that was probably the highlight of the movie. Which apparently most of that was improvised because apparently he was like drunk and high the entire production, and Altman was just completely thrilled that he was because he just liked what he was doing. But for those kind of reasons, and there is a lot of interesting camera work. I think watching the wife and the husband argue while you see Philip on the sand, kind of trying to dodge
That
the
was cool.
ocean
That was cool.
waves.
That was clever.
Yeah, and you see that reflected later when you see Roger walking out to the ocean as they're talking. Um, that kind of stuff. There's a lot of,
Shadowing. It's foreshadowing.
yeah, it's foreshadowing. But it's clever, it's fun, it's kind of, I think, visually very appealing and looks great. I love the joke of the John Williams song that keeps coming back in different forms. It's like a piano thing, it's a mazurka at one point, it's a funeral
It's the
song.
funeral march, yeah,
It's the
in
funeral
Mexico.
march. It's just this song just like bubbles up over and over again. It felt like such a funny joke, kind of, playing on the sort of soundtrack of this genre. Um, for all those reasons, I really, really, really did like this movie a lot. Um, I know, KJ, I got the impression
Why,
not for you.
why was Roger on house arrest in a random apartment in the beginning of the movie?
That doesn't work either. So the idea is that Harry Hamlin from Nashville
From Nashville.
is
What was he doing in the
blackmailing him.
movie?
So in the book, it makes a little more sense. So in the book, he's a doctor who's no longer licensed for presumably prescribing things he shouldn't to his patients, and he's living alone in something that's sort of like a former facility with a houseboy who's pretty
Yeah, and it's an
violent.
artist's colony. He has it as an
Yeah,
artist's colony.
yeah, but I think he's alone there, right? It's
He's alone
just
there, yeah, with the
yeah,
other with the like schizophrenic houseboy.
yeah, and so he has Roger sort of kidnapped. Um,
Well,
in the
he's there to clarify. It's also Roger went there. So the idea is
mm,
supposed to be Roger's obviously an alcoholic, and the idea is Roger will when he gets so drunk and he feels so down and he feels like he's gonna do something bad, he would call up like he would basically try to get himself into somewhere where he that would cure him of his alcoholism. So he would go to this place basically to detox. So the idea is he called up this guy and was like, I'm gonna do something bad, like I'm gonna beat my wife, I'm gonna kill myself, like I need you to come get me. And so this fake doctor comes and gets him and then like locks him in this room and is like, I won't let you go until you give me money, is what happens in the book. And so the wife hires Marlowe to go find him because
mhm.
basically she's like, I know he's at some detox center, but I don't know where. So I need you to find out where he is because he hasn't come back. That's what happens in the book.
And in the book, and I think in the movie, the reason why the doctor has so much sway is that Roger thinks he killed his lover, that woman who is his wife's sister, or not his wife's sister, excuse me, the other woman, the woman who gets
Well, in the book, it
Terry's
is.
wife.
Yeah.
Roger was Terry's wife's lover, and Roger thinks he killed her in a drunken rage, and the
So
doctor,
that's why he keeps getting himself checked into these facilities when he
yeah,
gets so drunk because he's worried he's going to kill his wife the same way that he killed his lover,
yeah, which turns
Terry's
out not to be
wife.
true, yeah. But it seemed my reading in the movie, I think this is true in the book too, is that the doctor knows this, and it's sort of a pseudo blackmail.
But don't worry, Marlowe's gonna show up and say you can go now.
Yeah, so
Time to go.
what doesn't make sense, and that makes sense in the book because now there's a person there who could take him away, and then Marlowe has to sort of manhandle the schizophrenic houseboy, so that you need the muscle there. What doesn't make any sense in the movie is why all the nurses would be on it and why they wouldn't say the doctor is there when he's right there. Like, why are the nurses part of that? It doesn't really make a lot of sense entirely. It does set up a really fun scene where he's walking around and everybody's telling him to shush. I sort of found that funny, but it part of the pieces don't necessarily add up.
I guess I just don't know if it's to your point on that. Like, I
It
don't think he
matters.
cares
Yeah.
that the plot doesn't make sense.
Mhm.
Like, I don't think he cares. And so his point is just like, I want to show another, like, I hadn't, I mean, I got it, but I didn't really think of it quite the way you were saying it. Like, I thought the tie thing was just sort of like a general joke. I didn't get the idea that, like, oh, yeah, it's just supposed to be that he's basically a 40s character put into a 70s
It's the tie
movie.
Marlowe
Yeah.
wears. It's the
And
American
so,
flag
yeah,
tie.
but it's just the idea that this is a character from a previous time being put into a modern day scenario. And so it's just watching him incompetently go through these spaces where the Humphrey Bogart, Philip Marlowe wouldn't, no one's going to shush Humphrey Bogart. No one shushes Humphrey Bogart. But you can easily shush Elliot Gould. And I think it's just meant as another sequence where he wanders around a place and people treat him badly. They treat him like he doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't make sense to the plot, but who cares? Like, we don't really care whether this scene actually makes sense. We just think it's fun to watch.
So talking about scenes that don't make sense. What about the guy that gave him a harmonica?
No, that makes no sense.
Yeah, but why not? Why do you need that to be explained?
I guess I don't. But
Mhm.
as a dude trying to follow the plot and trying to follow the movie, right? Was that somebody?
That was probably no. Maybe that's your
No.
mistake. You were trying to follow the plot.
I mean, there's nothing. There's also nothing incorrectly plotted about some guy giving him a harmonica.
I
But
thought I missed
in
something.
these kind of movies, anytime something happens, you think it's important. And
Mhm.
again, that might be the point.
I think
Like
that
he's sort of
is,
making fun of that. That if
yeah.
this was again, if this was a Philip, if this is like the Humphrey Bogart Philip Marlowe, or this is Double Indemnity, if you see something like that, you're thinking, oh, that's gonna matter later. Like that's gonna come back. Whatever was said there, and I don't know if that's just Altman's just having fun with that and just being like, I'm just gonna show this to you because I think it's funny. It has nothing to do with it, but it's funny. Like he's just like, I don't care whether it makes sense. I don't care. He is playing with the conventions of a comic of a noir, and he's playing upon the audience's expectations that they will think that this matters. They will be trying to follow this plot. They will be trying to see what's going on with it. And he's basically like, I don't care. That's not what you're here for. I mean, I don't know. Is that what he's doing? I'm not
I
sure.
think so, because Ullman is famously the most uneconomic director of all time. I mean, if you think of noir, or if you think of even going back to the Golden Age detective stuff, right? Which Altman did a Golden Age detective fiction in detective film with Gosford Park. The idea there is they're the most economic. Everything matters. Everything said counts. Everything is going to have to be put back into the calculation. With Altman, he's just going to put things there that he likes. He's going to film a ton of stuff. He's going to do a ton of improv, and he's going to put stuff there that he likes. And he likes the harmonica. He likes that little bit. He likes that it's weird. And I like it too. It's just weird. It's this guy who's covered in burns who can't play his harmonica anymore. And so he wants just anyone to play the harmonica. He wants someone to play the harmonica. It has nothing to do with anything. He just wants someone to have fun playing a harmonica he can no longer play. Doesn't make any sense. It doesn't have to make any sense. It's just there because he likes that bit of nonsense. And the movie ends with Philip Marlowe playing the harmonica. He finds his little happy space and plays the harmonica. And yeah, it do we need that? No. Does it violate the conventions of not only, I think, noir detective fiction, I think it violates the conventions of all detective fiction that we have looked at on this show up to this point. Um, but it's fine because it's kind of like weird and interesting, and the actors are just really good, so we can follow them and enjoy that bit of weirdness. I mean, it's a movie about not explaining every detail. Right? If this was a golden age or if this was a classic noir, those nude women would have something to do with something. Right? They would be into the plot in some way. You would mention them, they would be
They would
incorporated.
have seen something. He would be trying to interview them while they're high and get information, or like even or they would at least feel the plot like when he went to go get the brownie mix for them, something would happen while he was out. Like so they don't even necessarily have to do it, but they can fuel why he goes out to do something. They have no purpose.
Yeah.
Like or even it could be like, oh, they're important because they distract the dude that's supposed to be tailing Marlowe, and that's how he gets away. It's like, no, he tells him to follow him. Like
He gives them the
he
address.
actually does get distracted by them, and Marlowe tells him where he's going. So they have no function whatsoever.
But I do think they give us, and this is where I think Altman is at his best, they give us place. They give us setting. Right. I think those women tell us something about the kind of space we're living in this world, which is This is a place where people in public get naked and high, and they can also afford the rent because they have a candle store. Like
Well,
this
it's
is a
also, I mean,
town.
to your point is he also, I mean, you're right. If the whole point here, I mean, we were saying this before, if the whole point is like the that Marlowe's struggle here is fighting against indolence, and just sort of laziness and people not doing anything, um, is that sort of what's going on here as well? That this is just another, I mean, that's more the book you were saying than the movie, but like I don't think you're meant to dislike the ladies across the way, but
No.
they're also just doing nothing. Like they are contributing nothing to this
To this world.
to this world.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it's well, I think it's two ways of looking at it, if you want to call it a problem. So for Chandler, it's a problem, right? Because once you become morally lazy, the S hits the fan, right? It's people are going to be bad. There's always going to be bad people, and you need a knight to come in and solve the problem. That becomes really, really difficult when decent people start to become morally lazy. When decent people don't tell other people around them, hey, there's this incredibly dangerous woman who's killing people. We need to stop this, as opposed to just grabbing their money and running. Right? I think that's the bitterness in the book. Is like, yeah, good and evil exist. We're moving into a world where there's good and evil, and there's just sloth. There's just lazy people in the middle who won't do anything about it. And so all the good people will just become slothful, not sinners in the kind of, whatever hell way.
Dante and yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right. Because lust and violence is inferno, sloth is in purgatory. It's not as grave a sin, but it's still the road that leads things to hell, as opposed to in the big sleep, where yes, you can, if you have a good man who's got a head on his shoulders, he can solve the violent problem. He can't solve it forever. You have to push that boulder back up the hill, but you still will have somebody pushing the boulder up the hill. I think by the end of the long goodbye, it's like, I don't, I don't know if anybody wants to do this anymore. But when you get to the movie, when you get to this movie, it's kind of like, hey, you know what? Like those women are, I don't, maybe they're not contributing anything to society, but it's fine, right? They're cute, they're naked, they're having fun, they're kind of funny, they're not hurting anything, they're not helping anything.
They're
Um,
very polite.
they're very nice. Yeah, they just want their brownies when.
You're the nicest neighbor we've ever had,
Mr.
Marlo.
Marlowe, you're the nicest neighbor we've
Like,
ever had.
I mean, I thought that was funny.
Yeah. But even the yoga, like the yoga thing, what are they doing? They're doing yoga. I don't know what it is, but that's what they're doing. I think the movie has it observes the sort of kind of because I think Altman just sees LA as a silly place. It's a sunny, happy place where dreams are made, but it's silly. Like the dreams are silly. You're going to be a movie star and make faces at a camera. I mean, the whole thing is just ridiculous, but it's also you don't have to be bitter about it. There's a nice beach. There's nice people. It's fine. There's violence in this world, but the scene itself it's kind of funny. Yeah, like Altman said, he said it's a satire in melancholy. Instead of just self-flagellating and getting really, really grim and angry about the world, we're gonna have a laugh. We're gonna enjoy ourselves a little bit. And if the violence doesn't really make any kind of sense, so what? Nothing else really makes sense anyway. I think it's far more Camus-like. We talked about Camus and the boulder going down the hill. Camus' whole point was like, no, Sisyphus has to smile when he's pushing the boulder up the hill. Like you have to enjoy life. Just because it's like it's not going to work out, or you're not going to make sense of it, doesn't mean you don't have fun and enjoy it. And I think that's what's going on in The Long Goodbye. I think there's just a lot of pleasure, even though there's violence waiting in the wings. I think that's why I like this movie too.
Yeah, I might need to watch it again. I might need to see if I agree with that.
Yeah.
I don't think you're wrong, but
Mhm.
I need to watch it now and see.
Not sure. Yeah.
I need to see if I agree. I don't
Mhm.
think it's wrong. I did not read it that way when I
Mhm.
watched it, but now I want to see if that's correct.
How did
I
you
don't
read it when you?
I mean, I thought he was just more just making fun of noir. Like I just
Yeah.
saw it more, which
Mhm.
he is, but I
He
think you're
is.
right. I think there's a little more to it, maybe. But
Mhm.
I mean, my original reading was like it's just sort of like a send up of a genre that's overdone. Like the
Mhm.
mad, not quite like there's like a Mad TV one I remember seeing once where they have like a noir thing and they're like, it's like the the femme fatale and the detective, and like they're on a train, and it's that like, where are you going, honey? I'm on a train going to here. Well, this train's going nowhere but down to the hell. Like we're going down. And it's like they're
Yeah,
like making fun of the ridiculous sort of
yeah,
dialogue
dialogue.
that they have in those things. And I thought originally, I'm like, oh, it's kind of a send up like that. So
Mhm,
I was kind of, that was why I'm like, is it just like, I get it that the genre and is just so overblown that you have to do something different with it now.
mhm,
You can do, what I was thinking about in my head was things like, if going back to my kind of preferred area of like medieval lit, you go back there and you look at, say, the tales of, King Arthur were sort of passe by, say, like the 14th century or so. And so you've got people like Chaucer who are essentially just kind of making fun of them.
mhm.
And, you're either doing that, but you can have like a really, really good writer can produce something still with a tired genre, and
Mhm.
thinking something like Sir Gawain. So you can
Yeah, or
have things.
Mallory is producing his Beth's King Arthur stuff in like the 1470s, which is
Yeah,
way after the
but he's more, I think it almost feels like he's recording what had come before, not
Mhm.
necessarily writing, like,
original material. I see.
yeah,
Yeah.
so I think there's something a little different going on with that. I agree, but I think it's more like, the classic stories had sort of become passé by that point,
Mhm.
but I just think it, and so it was like, oh, is this just sort of like, okay, you either make fun of it, or, you might have like an homage piece to it. Is that sort of where this genre has gone? And that was what he was doing, was essentially like, we're just going to kind of make fun of the genre.
Mhm.
I think your idea is a little more interesting than just he's just making fun of the
Mhm.
genre, which
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, I think it's both. I think he is sending up things, certainly.
he is, but he's
Mhm.
doing it with more of a purpose than, say,
Yeah.
Spaceballs or something,
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
I love Young Frankenstein. It's one of my favorite
Mhm.
movies, but, I mean, that's he's not making a point.
No, he's just,
Young
yeah, he's
Frankenstein is just
spoofing.
hilarious,
Mhm.
and it's
Yeah.
really, really clever. I thought it was sort of a little more along those lines. I'm surprised Mel Brooks never has he ever done like a noir? I'm surprised he hasn't done that. I think that's like,
Hmm.
has he never did that?
Yeah, he's still a stein.
He's still going, right?
Yeah, he's still going. I don't know
Yeah,
how.
I'm just shocked he never made like a noir spoof,
Mhm.
given how many other spoofs he did.
Yeah. I'm not sure. I'll look that up. I didn't think he did, but
I don't think he did either, but he did like silent movies. He did the Western, he did the horror movie, he did
mhm.
Spaceballs, he did, he
He did the
started doing
historical
specific.
epic.
Yeah, he did the historical epic. Like he did all of them. So why did he never do like why did he
Noir.
never do
Huh.
that one? I don't know why he never did noir. I feel
Hmm.
like that was just.
Too pulpy. It's beneath him. He's kind of.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's too beneath him. The man who made the joke about biggest dickus is it this.
He has a wife, you know.
he has he has wife, you know.
Yeah, one more thing. The background sounds in this movie were turned up a lot. So if you
Mhm.
did want to hear the dialogue, if you were interested in it, you really had to listen hard.
See, now I might have noticed that, except that the subtitles were on the movie I watched, and I
I
could not
should
figure
have
out how
put
to
the
turn them
subtitles
off.
on.
So I was just like trying. I'm like,
Mm.
and it's the annoying thing with subtitles where I'm trying to not read them, and I
Mm.
don't think it's possible to not read subtitles when they are
Mhm.
on there. Like
Mhm.
it's really hard to not glance down at them.
Mhm.
If they wanted
So
to accurately put the subtitles, they should have made them very dim so they were hard to read. Like you
yeah.
really had to look to see these subtitles.
So your point could be 100% accurate, but I can't comment on it because
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting soundscape. KJ just shook his head.
KJ's definitely, he's like, I'm picking next season's topic. I am not doing this again. And you may not bring up German existentialism or
We're not doing modernity. We're not doing
We talked a
German
lot about modernity.
existentialism.
It's just Mel Brooks. It's Mel
Vi-
Brooks's parodic adaptation of various things.
I can't imagine how bitter you're going to be by the time we get to Name of the Rose.
I think we're more than halfway through the season, audience.
Mm.
Stay with us.
Yeah, I'm loving it. This is, I told you, this is bye.
If you enjoyed The Long Goodbye and are looking for more adaptations of The Long Goodbye, check out the 1954 TV anthology film with Dick Powell as Marlowe, or the BBC radio adaptation from 1978 with Ed Bishop as the detective. The same radio play was restaged in 2011 with Toby Stevens.
You can rate and review this show anywhere fine podcasts are available. For those viewing in YouTube land, if you haven't already, please like this video, subscribe to the Talking Studios channel for all our exciting content, and follow us on social media at Talking Studios. Check out other shows by Talking Studios, including Talking Pictures Trivia, where we explore movies through trivia, Keep Making Movies, where we explore micro-budget films, Limited Lexicon, where we play through text-based adventure games, and Get the Point, where we slowly reveal a movie poster and try to guess which movie poster it is. Got a question for us? Call the Talking Studios hotline at 201-467-8679 and leave a message. It may be featured on a future episode. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Adapt It, wherever fine podcasts are found.
Join us next time when we discuss the 2005 novel The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo and the 2011 film adaptation.
Wow, Talking Studios.
Next week, we'll be discussing The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo to explore cold spaces. KJ, if you could adapt The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo into any medium, what would it be?
So to start with, I don't want to actually do this because it's not for me. But what I would like to do is have an Airbnb style fake true crime experience. So you sign up, you go out to this cottage that's, I don't know about literally on an island, but maybe on a farm that has a few other buildings, a few actors to be the crazy brother-in-law over there, over here, over there. They've been researching a crime forever. They can't figure it out. They drop a pile of paper that you get to go through. Doesn't have to be a solo event. You and your family can come solve this crime. Takes about a weekend. It's like an extraordinarily elaborate escape room that you go away for the weekend and solve on the premise, trying to fully immerse yourself and believe that you are with a bazillionaire, but he's actually making money off of you instead of just being independently wealthy. And this is it. And maybe one of the actors is similar to our second lead character in this movie, the girl with the dragon tattoo.
That would be fun.
I actually like that.
I like that a
I think
lot.
Yeah,
an
you guys
idea.
signing up for this?
Yeah, I
No,
would.
but I would invest in it.
Yeah? All right, maybe after season 2 of Adapted here, we'll start putting together,
We'll actually take our silly ideas and make them into good
make
ideas.
them real. We have different true crimes. One of them, everyone's a Muppet.
Mm-hmm.
True
Yep.
fake crimes.
Mm-hmm.
It was Gonzo, I guess. I don't know. How about you, Pat? What would your adaptation be?
So I would do a line of like those like learn how to code in a week kind of things, or the for dummies books, but it would be like hacking for dummies with to so that you could actually learn or have at least any idea what it is she does in this movie and book, because they never actually explain, and it's just magic.
Yeah.
How to hack like the girl with the dragon tattoo.
Yeah, I mean, we probably will get into it next week, but it does drive me a little crazy how they're just like, especially when they're like, "How did you learn how to do this?" And she's like, "I've always been able to do it." I'm like, no, you haven't. That's not how skills work.
It's like language. You're just born with it in some
Yeah,
way.
well, it's like it always bugs me. It's the Goodwill Hunting approach
Yeah,
to
yeah, the
storytelling, where it's
genius,
like,
yeah.
yeah, we're like we don't need to get into how they did this thing. They just know it naturally. Plato was right. They just got direct access to it. Like that's how it was. Tom, what about you?
In that vein, I'm gonna go with a VPN because I figured that the plot of this book would not go forward if people had a VPN back when this thing is taking place in the early 2000s. I think that would,
I mean, they did. Apparently, just no one used them.
yeah, or if people were using them in the early 2000s, I think the history of Miss Salander would be an advertisement unto itself for our Girl with the Dragon Tattoo VPN.
I don't want to ask Tom, but how would it be like? I think she would have been able to figure out like if she
Would
could
she
do all that
have?
other.
I
Yeah,
don't know. I'm the
I was
one
gonna
person here who knows anything about computers.
that's why I was surprised. I was
As
kind of
far-
excited. I'm like, oh, maybe Tom learned about VPNs and he's good.
No. As far as I know, angels operate my computer. That's how computers work. It's angels. They can fit on the head of a pin, and they are making this thing operate.
I mean, the
know nothing
ease with
about-
which she does hack is kind of absurd. But
Yeah.
It's a very private network. Is that what VPN stands for?
Yeah, as far as I know, yes. It's like
very, very private.
Very private network.